This is the Beginning Ham Radio series, sponsored by the Portland Amateur Radio Club. And this is our January 14th meeting. For our agenda tonight, we can do some introductions to people who are like, this is your first time joining this meeting. We'll do some introductions. And then I'm going to just go over the meeting format. As we're going along here, we're tweaking how this meeting works to make it hopefully better for everybody and make sure that you guys get a good use of your time. Because if we see you return back next week, that's a good signal, to us that we're doing something right. If you do have any suggestions, though, please let us know. We'll try to, and we've actually had quite a few people who wrote in some suggestions. So tonight's topic that we'll start off with is going to be Ctcss or PL tones. And we'll kind of describe what that is in a minute. And then after the topic, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. This is really informal. If there's a week that you can't join or anything, don't sweat it. If you have to join late, feel free to join late. If you have to go early, that's fine too. So we're keeping this pretty informal. This is not like our regular meeting where we force you to stay until the end. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so for first-time participants, this is your first meeting. If you want, let us know what your name is and your call sign, if you have one, and then kind of what brought you into ham radio. You can also tell us like what you want to get out of these types of meetings too. And you want to be brave and go first?
Yeah, I'll go first.
All right.
Ryan Miller, KJ7OQK. I've always wanted to get into it, but never had enough time. And about 5 years ago, I ended up buying, that thing.
Yeah.
And promised a close friend of mine that I would get my license. And 2 years went by and other priorities came into play. He ended up passing away, and I just had to keep that promise, regardless if I, pursue it much more or not. I just needed to get it and practice it and use it to fulfill my promise to him. So that was my big motivator that got it off the back burner and put it on the front burner. And now I'm excited about it, just using it when I'm hiking or hunting. Go and see what happens.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's almost like a two-step process too. It's like getting your license, which I'm sure your friend is proud of, no matter where he is, and but really, it's a license to learn. So now it's great that you've come to this meeting. Ham radio, there's a ton of information, and there's just no way to even scratch the surface with just an hour or two. So that's why we've designed these to kind of help get you up and running. I don't expect people to keep joining after a year, 2 years, whatever. But it's just kind of a springboard to get you interested and find out what like really makes you excited about the ham radio hobby, and then you just kind of go from there. So thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
Anybody else first time that would like to introduce themselves? Samantha?
Hey, my name's Sam, and no call sign, no ham radio either. I saw this meeting on Zoom was for beginners, so this is something I've been interested in for a while. I'm actually interested in trying to build a ham radio, and I didn't even know like a license would be required. So I'm here to get information and just find out everything I can about it, and particularly what the advantages might be of building a radio versus just buying one, because it could be a big time commitment.
Yeah, and it just kind of depends on the radio that you want to build. Some you can actually build from a kit in just an afternoon or something. There are others that if you really want to build it from scratch, people are still working on them today after years and years. But so welcome. I hope we can cover enough for you today to get excited about ham radio. We're going to talk very specifically about a particular aspect, Ctcss, but if you have any questions at the end, we're more than welcome to help you understand. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody else is your first time to a meeting like this that would like to introduce themselves?
It's my first time here.
Oh, hey, Stevie.
Hey guys. So I'm a mom of two almost 14-year-old kids here in Portland. We live in Cully. And I have been on the interwebs trying to figure out the best way to go about ham radio. I thought at first I wanted to stay in the analog world, but the more I learn about FT8, and there's like on the YouTube platform, there's a group of ham radio people. Because of the COVID, I wasn't able to get to the physical meetings here in Portland. Anyways, I'm very excited. I'm also learning Raspberry Pi concurrently with ham radio. I have a Yaesu FT65. I've been on hamstudy.org, and the pre-test, the practice test, I'm getting like 85%. So that's where I am.
That's awesome. You know what? At 85%, you're ready to take the test.
Yes, sir. That's what I'm here for.
Yep. And I think I emailed you information about taking the test, right?
You absolutely answered all of my questions.
Cool.
Yes. And I'm looking forward to moving forward with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and if anybody else is interested in taking their test, it is actually extremely easy now to do that because all the tests are done online now, at least for now because of COVID. We may go back to giving them in person, but there is a local testing group here in Portland that has been doing a lot of online tests, and they conduct, I think, at least 6-7 sessions a week, and each of those sessions usually has like 2 to 4 people, and so your chances of if you wanted to take one tomorrow, there's a very good chance that they have an opening. And I will put that website into the chat. So if you're interested in finding out more about how to get licensed, or you're ready to get licensed, this is one of the best groups to contact, just because I know they have openings. But if you already have another group, you know, you can go with them too. They're all the same. They cost the same amount of money too. So cool. Well, thank you very much, Stevie. Anybody else first time that would like to introduce themselves? Hey, Jacob.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, it's my first time doing this. I had to take a break for a little bit just due to work, but I'm interested because I shout out to Marino. I talked with him last year, and he told me about the net team and the beacon, so I became a member of both afterwards. And I'm trying to become an ARO for the team and also for the beacon as well. So that's what I'm trying to get my license so I can become an asset in regards to those teams. And I have this book as well that I've been kind of studying, the technician class, but I swear, see, I'm prior service. So I was a radio operator there. Doing it in the civilian world is just, it just goes right over my head. So I have radio experience overseas, just in the civilian world, it's way different. So I'm a little slow in that regard, just because I don't understand a lot of the terminology and stuff. So I'm honestly just looking for like a layman's term ham radio, because it's a lot.
Yeah,
we can help you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll probably find that there are some things that you will understand that do translate over. There are certain portions of the test, though, that are strict memorization, like what band is the, what frequencies are the 20-meter band. Unless you're into ham radio, you probably have no reason to know that. Sounds good, like you have a purpose for getting into ham radio. Steven mentioned that she was looking at analog, but thinking about getting into digital. And it's great to find something now to really kind of get you excited about ham radio. But I think what you're going to find is that once you get into it, hopefully you don't limit yourself to just one thing. Ham radio is interesting because it's sort of like an umbrella term that's really just literally hundreds of sub hobbies of things that you can do. So that's great. Thank you very much, Jacob. Anybody else first time that would like to introduce themselves? Cool. If not, let's move on. Let's see if I can. All right. So the meeting format, just so you know, like in future, this meeting and going into the future, we'll do some introductions first. We'll have a main topic that's about 30 minutes long. It's not always going to be me that's presenting it. Maybe some of our other, what I call Elmers, and we'll present it, like Nick or Marino, or I see Bruce on, Dan is on. Thanks for joining, guys. So these are all people that know a lot about ham radio. We may not know all the same areas. I, for example, don't know a whole lot about digital, but Nick may know a lot more than I do. So we'll kind of mix it up a little bit, and then we will also announce the topics in advance. So I hope you guys join regardless, but if there is a topic that maybe you already know about, and you don't, feel like you need to know any more, and you don't have any other questions, then, feel free to skip a week or whatnot. But I'll send that out in the email invite that I send out every week. So the main topic will be about 30 minutes. Then we'll go to a general questions and answers, and we'll have, up to about 60 minutes to do general questions and answers, either on the main topic or on anything else ham radio related. So Samantha, if you don't, if you have other questions like, how do I build a radio, or where can I look for parts and things like that, we won't cover that tonight in the main topic, but feel free to ask any question that you like about ham radio, and we'll try to do our best to answer it. And then just finally, comments and suggestions at the end. If all questions are answered, in the 30 minutes of the 60-minute that we allot, then we can kind of wrap up early. In general, these meetings will be about an hour and a half long, give or take. And ask questions at any time. I'd like to keep this pretty informal, and hopefully going forward, other people that present, they'll kind of have the same type of meeting format. So tonight's topic is Ctcss, or Continuous Tone Coded Squelch System. But before we even start talking about that, I want to make just one, get a couple definitions out of the way. So on the top there, you see two radios. They're both using the same frequency, and they're just talking back and forth. And we are familiar with this just with the walkie-talkies that we used as a kid, right? They're generally on the same frequency. They're only using those two radios to talk back and forth with. However, there is something called duplex, where you're actually using two different frequencies to talk to the same person. And so on the slide here, you'll see that the transmission frequency going up to what they call a repeater is one frequency, and the reception frequency is another. The reason that we do duplex in general is because it allows us to talk through a device called a repeater. And a repeater is simply, it is what it sounds like. It's a device that when you transmit to it, it will repeat whatever it hears on another frequency. So if the radio on the left is transmitting, then the repeater will retransmit exactly what is said on a different frequency. So for example, radio A is transmitting on that red line going up on 147.69. The repeater is simply just rebroadcasting that same voice on 147.09. The advantage of this is that most repeaters are located in high locations, like a building, or more likely a mountain that's several thousand feet up. They're also generally pretty powerful, anywhere from 50 watts usually is where repeaters power output starts at, up to 100 or so watts. So a repeater with that power and that elevation can easily cover very large areas. For example, all of Portland area, maybe even down to Salem and even parts of Eugene, can easily be covered by a repeater. So one advantage of that is simply that you can use a handheld to go outside and transmit to a repeater, and somebody in Eugene that has a handheld also can actually hear what you're saying. That would not be possible with the simplex operation that you see on the top. I think one of the things that we've all experienced as kids is, as you get out too far, whether it's 2 blocks, 5 blocks, 6 blocks, you can no longer hear each other. So that's where the repeater comes in. All right, so there's kind of one definition, and you'll see why I cover this in just a second. So Ctcss or PL tones, those are the same thing. I put up some definitions here. So what Ctcss stands for, you may also hear PL or PL tone, and PL stands for private line. And this was a Motorola trademark that when, I think it was back in the 60s, when Motorola kind of came up with this concept that we're going to be talking about tonight. And then they just happened to trademark private line. It was first actually, the story that I know is it was first kind of, the first use was in taxi cabs in New York on the commercial side, not necessarily on the ham radio side. Tone squelch is kind of the same. It's just another way to refer to this particular scheme. Tone means that the when a radio is transmitting, it may be transmitting a tone, and so that's what tone stands for. Whereas tone squelch is that it is not only transmitting a tone, but it's also expecting to hear back a tone. So there's tone and tone squelch, and I tried my best to lay this out as a story, so it may seem a little confusing now, but hopefully it'll make sense in the next few slides. Digital DCS or digital coded squelch is going to be the same thing as Ctcss, except it's going to be digital. So instead of an analog tone that's used, it's a digital code. In ham radio, you can use DCS. To my knowledge, there's no rule against using it. It's just not common very much. Anybody else like Marino, Dan, Nick, have you ever used DCS in ham radio? Yeah. Yep. But you'll find it on radios and in the manuals too. And then squelch. So squelch is the technical definition. It's a circuit that suppresses audio in the absence of strong signals. And you can think of it as a noise gate. So when you turn on an FM radio, and an FM radio is usually like a handheld radio or a mobile radio. These are just like walkie-talkies. Most of the walkie-talkies that we've played with as a kid are FM. And when you turn them on, technically you would always hear static or always hear weak signals. But sometimes it gets annoying. And so early on, the people that manufactured and designed FM radios said, well, wouldn't it be nice if we got rid of the static until somebody was actually talking and you would want to hear the talking? So static or the noise floor is usually, a pretty weak signal, where somebody talking that you can actually hear them really well is a strong signal. So what squelch does is the circuit suppresses the weak signals so that your audio speaker on your radio is silent until there is strong signals nearby. And when the strong signals come, when it receives strong signals, then it opens up that squelch, and then you can hear the people talking. And I'm going to stop here if there's any questions about that or anything we've covered so far.
So
Cool.
just to be clear, squelch attenuates all signals until a strong signal is present.
Yes. Yeah, so it is, and you can turn it up and down. So usually squelch is sort of like a volume knob in the sense that it may go from 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. So if you only have your squelch set at a 2, that means that there are going to be occasions where there's medium strength signals that will come through. It may be people talking. It may be just nearby noise that just happens to be slightly strong, and you will hear that. But if you turn it all the way up, then only the strongest signals can actually come through.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
think of the definition, what it says here, a circuit that suppresses audio. If you have the squelch to 0, there is little suppression, so you hear everything, including the noise. But if you don't want to hear the noise, you want to hear only human transmissions that generally come at a higher volume, then you adjust your squelch knob and you raise this barrier. So generally the radio is silent because it suppresses the audio, the noise. But when there is some human talking and the signal comes, with a certain amount of power and volume, then breaks through the barrier of the squelch, and then you can hear it. So it's a system to essentially silence your radio enough that you don't hear the noise, but you hear the real transmissions that come through once in a while.
One of the great things about FM radio is the squelch system, because if you're driving in a truck, whether you're a pizza delivery person, whether you're a ham radio operator, listening to static constantly is very annoying. And it's actually, if you don't have to listen to it, you don't want to. Like, why would anybody want to be in a noisy airplane? So that's why the squelch system is so nice to have. Nick.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out, I might have missed you saying this, but when you are doing that communication between radios directly, it is important to remember to turn your squelch value down so that you hear that background noise, in case that signal is so low that you could actually make something out with it, but the squelch would have shut it out entirely. And so it's important to remember to do that if you're trying to pick up a weak signal.
Yep, absolutely. And that's why, you'll get used to it as a ham radio operator using FM radio. You will want to adjust your squelch. You don't always want to keep it up at 10, because that may mean that only signals of people, within a block of you, you'll be able to hear, or with high power radios. Okay, we may come back to that slide if there's any questions. So why PL tones? And here's just an example, and I'll just read this. So suppose there's a two-way radio frequency that's shared by a pizza delivery service company and a landscape maintenance service. So conventional radios without Ctcss or any way to block those transmissions between each other would hear all transmissions from the group. So landscapers would have to listen to pizza guys, and pizza guys would have to listen to landscape guys. So with Ctcss, it's the pizza guys would have one tone, and the landscape people would have another tone. And so in that way, radios from the pizza place would only be able to hear people from the pizza place, and landscape guys from the landscape place. Now, this is supposed to reduce missed messages and distraction of unnecessary chatter on the radio. Sometimes it's referred to as a subchannel. It's a misnomer, because in this particular case, even though they're using two different tones, it is the same frequency. So you can kind of see there may be a problem with that that sometimes occurs if they're using the same frequency at the same time. But let's just go through how it works first. So here, let me put, no. So there are three modes that we want to take a look at. And this is a Yaesu FT60. It's one of the radios that we strongly recommend first time ham radio people get. It's actually the one that I still use after 30 years. It's a great high value, low cost radio. On the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a T symbol above the frequency right here, if you can see my mouse. And then that means that the tone is turned on. And it means that the radio, every time you transmit, is sending out not only your voice, but it's sending out what they call a subaudible tone. It's just means that it's a tone that's low enough that normally the radio cannot reproduce it when it's when you hear noise from the speaker. It technically is audible, but normally it's low enough that it would not you wouldn't be able to hear it. The middle one here is there's a T and an SQ. So the T again still stands for tone. SQ stands for squelch. So this particular radio is in a mode called tone squelch. So it's not only transmitting the tone, but in order for you to hear anybody, you also have to receive that same tone that you have your radio set to, sort of like a key. And we'll go through that. I have a couple more slides after this that'll kind of explain it. The third radio display here has neither the T or the SQ, and that just means that there is no tone and there is no tone squelch. And then just so you know, the number of tones, this is kind of a chart of the common 50 Ctcss tones. So tone number 1 is 67 hertz. Tone number 2 is 69.3 hertz. So they're really, this is the way that most radios are programmed, both ham radio and FRS, GMRS, you know, the little bubble pack radios with the, you know, stubby antenna on it. They use tones also, and they use, for the most part, with few exceptions, the same definition, the same 50 tones. All right, so here's an example of just simplex operation where the left radio is transmitting a radio signal to the right radio, and they're on the same frequency, but their tone and tone squelch are turned off. So when the left one transmits, the right one can hear, and vice versa. When the right one transmits, the left one can hear. Clear enough? Cool. So here on the left-hand side, we've not changed anything, but on the right-hand side, the radio is set to tone squelch of 107.2. So what that means is that it is expecting to hear a tone of 107.2. If it does not open the squelch up at all, no matter how close the two radios are. And so in this example, like a good analogy would be the radio on the left belongs to, you know, either somebody in the pizza company or somebody like that, you know, has is not part of the group that is that's using the radio on the right, if that makes sense. So this is a good way and a good reason, an example, I guess, of interference that the radio on the right is blocking. All right, so in order to actually, for the radio on the right to hear what the radio on the left is transmitting, the radio on the left has to either turn their tone or their tone squelch, because in either tone mode or tone squelch mode, it's going to transmit a tone of 107.2. And so what that means is that when the radio on the left is transmitting, not only is it transmitting this radio signal, it's also transmitting this PL tone. And because it's doing that, and the radio on the right is set to tone squelch, then the radio on the right can receive what the radio on the left is transmitting, because it has that key, so to speak.
Question.
Yeah.
I understand the blocking for the right-hand radio, not hearing things. But what if the pizza guy and the landscape guy both key up at the same time on the exact same frequency and they're in range together?
Yeah, so that's a good question.
You're not using the codes, you walk on top of each other and whoever's stronger wins.
Yep.
And it interferes. So how does that address this at all?
It does not. And that's why, you know, saying it's not a different frequency. So Kirk, you're absolutely right. Like when two radios transmit at the same time, tone or no tone, what ends up happening is either a very strong signal wins out, or they both kind of clash together and you can barely make out what one or the other is saying. So unfortunately, that's one of the drawbacks to the Ctcss, is that it solves some problems in that if there is nobody transmitting, it blocks interference. But if the frequency is busy, and let's say you have 10 businesses on the same frequency, and they're all using different tones, it may not solve the problem that of interference.
Okay.
Or unwanted chat. Yep.
just double checking what I assumed, because everybody
Yes.
knows what assuming does, right?
Yeah. And this slide is really just to show that it happens the same in reverse. Normally, if you are going to use tone or tone squelch, this is kind of how you would program both radios to have the same frequency and the same tone squelch. And it allows you to talk between each other without hearing other radios that may not be in your group, so to speak. Samantha.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to get a clear understanding of how this works at the hardware level. And so my question is it possible to hunt for someone else's tone on the same frequency? Like, it sounds like there's some kind of piece within the radio that is looking at everything on that frequency and checking, does this have that tone in order to filter? Is that right?
Yeah. So, and you bring up a very good point. I would like to point out that this particular scheme, like tones, don't offer any privacy. So when you are transmitting and receiving with a tone, don't expect that other people can't hear you, because they certainly can hear you. Because you could, with a radio with no tone on it, you can hear everything. So regardless of whether you're transmitting a tone or not, other people can hear you. And some radios do have the ability to tell you what tone another radio that's currently transmitting is using. So that's one way that you could like just find out what their tone is. The other way just to hear a radio that is transmitting a tone is just to turn off your tone squelch, because a radio without any tone squelch can hear everything that's on that frequency.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So it's really, the whole purpose of tones, at least for simplex, is to minimize interference that may be occurring locally. And it very well may be that, you are using your handhelds in a simplex fashion on low power, but somebody else is transmitting with a high antenna using 100 watts of power. They would never be able to hear you in certain circumstances, but you and your friend decide to use tone squelch or this system just to minimize interference. So that's one potential reason that you could use it. The other case to using tone squelch, and the more common case to using tone squelch, is with a repeater system. So because the repeater is so high, and because its receive area, like it can hear for tens, if not hundreds of miles around. And so there may be conditions and people that are using the same frequency that may be 200 miles away, but the repeater can still pick it up. And that person that's 200 miles away may not intend to use the repeater. So the repeaters will actually have tones set so that the people that want to use the repeater, that are intending to use the repeater, have to turn their tone on in order to activate the repeater. But any other interference that's like outside, that people aren't intending to use the repeater, they're blocked by the repeater. So that's probably the most common reason and why ham radio operators use tone. And I think that was, oh yeah, this was just my last point. There, on most radios, if not all radios, there is a monitor button. And a monitor button, when you press it, even when you have your tone squelch turned on, normally you don't hear anything unless the signal is accompanied by the same tone that you have your radio set to. However, if you push down the monitor button, it breaks the squelch completely, so that you hear the static, you hear anybody else that happens to be on that frequency, regardless of whether or not they have a tone. And it's just a good, easy, convenient way to check if there's any activity on the channel. And I know a lot of people don't use the monitor button before every time that they start transmitting on a frequency while they're using tone squelch. But in ham radio, kind of the number one rule is try to always listen before you transmit. just because if somebody else is transmitting at the same time you are, most likely nobody's going to hear either transmission. And so always just try to listen before you transmit, and using the monitor button when you're using tone squelch is a good way to do that. And so on the left-hand side, I didn't label it, but the monitor button on the Yaesu FT60 is this middle button right here. And then this is a very common radio. It's the Baofeng. I think, Ryan, you have one of these. The monitor button, unless you program it to something else, is this bottom button right here. And the way it works is it's just a momentary button. You push it, you can hear static, you let it go, it goes back to tone squelch. Cool. That is my presentation. Are there any questions on specifically on tone squelch?
I have one.
Yeah.
How do you know what the tone is for a repeater?
Very good question. Yeah. So there are repeater directories or guides. You can also, when you look up like our ham club on the Portland Amateur Radio Club, we have a web page that shows what repeaters the club maintains and operates, and also what frequency they are and what tone you need. So for example, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it's 14718 needs a tone of 103.7, I think. Sometimes, so here in this chart, it's 103.5. Whereas the other repeater that Portland Amateur Radio Club operates for FM analog is 14684, and that requires no tone.
Max, on that topic,
Yeah.
Sources for the PL tones, you had mentioned to me about Repeater Book.
Yeah.
I've also gone to clubs' websites to see what they have posted. And a lot of times I find there's a conflict.
Yeah.
Contradiction. In that case, which one do you see as the valid one?
I mean, I would try the club one first, just because the PL tones are not usually changed very often. And I would say that repeater books, directories, and other general databases are updated even less. Yeah, so one of the, let me just, for fun, pull up a, I'm gonna stop. Sorry, give me just a second.
Well, Max is looking for thing. I'm going to make a comment.
Ahead.
I'm just going to say that Repeater Book is a pro bono effort, is a non-commercial organization. It's actually made by a firefighter here in Gresham that has set up this website and the system. And the content of the database with all these repeaters informations is distributed to people out there that take the volunteer job to keep them up to date. So if a repeater group of a radio club is good, they generally try to keep their information about their own repeater fresh and current in Repeater Book, but sometimes that is not the case. So between the webpage of a club and Repeater Book, I would trust first the webpage of the radio club that manages the repeater. You go to the source, basically.
What I run into, when I first got my Baofeng, I downloaded the Chirp software and said, give me all the repeaters within 50 miles, which I ended up with 350 different channels, if you will, or frequency sets. And there are times when I'm scanning, I will pick up, I'll have the same base frequency, but one repeater is in Yakima, one's in Eugene, and obviously from my house, I can't talk to either one of those. And then there's one somewhere in the general Portland area, and they all have different tones. So if you could listen to Yakima possibly, or you think it's Yakima, it's really the Portland one. I mean, if you try to transmit, the tones are all wrong. So you may end up with several repeaters kind of close together on the same frequency. and the tone helps you separate which one you're really trying to talk to. So,
Yeah, let's hear what Bruce has to say. Go ahead, Bruce.
A couple quick ones. One is I just put in chat a resource that's useful in Multnomah County and also covers some adjoining counties. And I can expand on that if there are questions. The other is a story that is almost funny unless it happens to you. I was helping somebody by telephone because their receiver had gone dead. And we eventually figured out that they'd accidentally turned on tone squelch on the receive side. Not on, it doesn't hurt to generate a tone that nobody's looking for, but if you suddenly require a tone that nobody's generating, your receiver appears to be dead. And at the time, I felt good about helping that person figure it out. About a month later, the receiver in my mobile radio went dead, and it took me 2 days to figure out same problem. So while it's a nice feature, the requiring a tone on a typical ham radio is not common, although useful. And it's more common that it gets turned on accidentally. And you need to look for that if your receiver appears to be dead.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. That's actually really, that's a good point, because you'll find that when you get into ham radio, that there are times when you're going to have to kind of troubleshoot, why am I not hearing anything? Or why are people not hearing me? And so this is kind of just one of many of those things that to check is, do I have my tone squelch on, and people, other people aren't transmitting that tone. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, Nick.
Yeah, Max, I know you want to keep this straightforward and simple. Another thing to remember about repeaters is frequency offset.
Mhm.
That frequently gets people in the same position that Bruce was describing, where they're transmitting, but nobody's hearing them from a distance. And there's actually, I don't know if you're planning to hold another meeting and talk about frequency offset and just general repeater information or not.
Yeah, I think that we're going to cover that kind of in a different, in another week. But if you want to talk about it or just kind of bring it up a little bit, like what a repeater offset is, I think that'd be good.
Well, in general, most repeaters will pick up on one frequency and transmit on another, so that they're not stomping on the same signal. And your radio you have to tell your radio what the frequency offset is, and it's a pretty standard frequency. So, and if you're not doing that, you'll be transmitting on the receive frequency, not the transmit frequency of the repeater. But actually, I'm getting that wrong. You'll be transmitting on the repeater receive frequency, but not the its retransmit frequency.
Yeah.
So nobody will hear you who's listening for the repeater's transmit frequency. So you need to know that, and people can easily check to see. There's a button on my handheld that when I push that, it basically, like the tone squelch, like canceling the tone squelch, it'll receive and transmit on the same frequency, and I can listen for a station trying to transmit on the frequency that they shouldn't be.
Yeah, and we'll cover that in more detail in probably one of the future, probably pretty soon, just because using a repeater is pretty common, especially when you're getting into it. It's great to be able to use a handheld to transmit a few blocks away or a few miles away, because they are more powerful than your walkie-talkies you had when you were a kid. But eventually you're going to want to get a more broad audience, and so even I think, Bruce, you guys as the net you guys use repeaters, right, as a way to communicate.
We certainly do for weekly meetings. We actually have 2 meetings on Sundays, one at 7 p.m. on a UHF repeater and one at 8:10 p.m. VHF repeater. For emergency communications, we'll often use a repeater for what we call a resource net, but the actual communication will be without a repeater because we want to simulate a situation in a disaster where either the repeaters are overloaded or non-functional. So it's a mix of repeater use and non-repeater use.
Cool. Thanks, Bruce. I would like to point out that Bruce is part of the Portland Net. Is that right? Could you just briefly describe what that is? I think it's a great thing because if anybody is interested in ham radio, one of the things you're going to want to do is either find clubs or find activities that you can use ham radio in. Ham radio is great, but it kind of requires other people to really enjoy it. So joining a group like that Bruce is involved in, or the Portland Amateur Radio Club is another way to kind of like meet people who you can use ham radio with.
Correct. And emergency communications is almost all 2 meter and 70 centimeter, which means that technician license gives you full rights to participate in emergency communications. There's a couple of exceptions, but they're minor. At the risk of giving you more information than Max was suggesting, there are 2 groups that focus on emergency communications. Underneath the National Amateur Radio Relay League, there's a organization called Amateur Radio Emergency Service, and that probably is on your technician test. And they focus 100% on radio communications, and they're typically organized at the county level. And Multnomah County has such an organization, and in fact, it's their website. I referred to you in the chat. The other type of organization in most parts of the country is called CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. And they're not fundamentally radio people. They're all about preparing for disasters. Some parts of the country, their focus would be on hurricanes. Others may be tornadoes. Others may be floods. Here in Portland, it's dominated by earthquake preparedness, but there is also consideration for other types of emergencies. A useful percentage of the people that are involved are ham radio operators, but far from all of them. Some of them focus on first aid and search and rescue, and they can use unlicensed radios for communication within their neighborhood. But a healthy percentage of us have amateur radio licenses, and we have monthly exercises that are ham radio only, and we have twice a year exercises that we work closely with the non-hams, and that's a half-an-hour story, and I'll stop now, unless you have questions.
And Bruce, do you have like a website that if anybody's here interested in getting involved in Portland Net?
Yeah, let me give you 2 ways. If you got your pencil handy, write down the 2 words Portland and Prepares. The second word is plural. Portland Prepares, run that together, and then add a .org. You'll find that that's more general than radios, but one of the tabs will take you to submenus of radio information, both licensed and unlicensed radios. So that's a good resource. There's another page that is accessible via a tiny URL. And Max, why don't you take back the mic for a second, and I want to make sure I don't goof that one up. I'll read it to you. No, why don't I put that in chat?
Yeah.
Give me a minute to paste that into chat.
Okay, cool. And there's a lot of good stuff in chat. And for those of you that can see it or can't see it, usually it's in the meeting controls. It may be under more, but if you just click on the chat button, it'll pop up the chat window. In the lower right-hand corner of the chat window, there's a 3-button ellipse. And if you click on that, you can actually download. I'm pretty sure you can.
Yeah, you can do save. Save chat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There it is. Save chat. Thanks, Marino.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that'll save it as a text file. We're also planning to post these videos of these meetings, plus the chat up to the Portland Amateur Radio Club website. I just got to get a few hours to kind of do that, but it'll be up there soon. So if you missed like the last couple of meetings, they'll be up there very soon. Cool. Any other questions?
Oh, I forgot to close the loop. I mentioned CERT, CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. 15 years ago, plus or minus, Portland was ready to set up their CERT, and somebody said, we can't call it that. And somebody said, why not? He says, well, when you pronounce it, it sounds just like SERT, and SERT is the police unit that responds to shootings. So they decided to just change the letters a little bit, and they call it Neighborhood Emergency Response Team, which is nice and short. But then for us ham radio people, net means a meeting by radio. So on Sunday night, we have a net, as in capital NET, meeting called NetNet. That is confusing. I don't know what is.
Comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
On one of your slides, Max, you showed 2 frequencies going to and from a repeater. That might be helpful to show to people again.
Okay, yeah. It'll just take me a minute. So Zoom has changed the way that they...
Hey, Max, while you do that,
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment about the nature of these beginners sessions. I think it's great that we can have presentations that gives a little bit of structure to these meetings. But it's also important that we sort of shut up and not talk too much.
Yeah.
And I'm talking because otherwise, if we kill the conversation, there is so much to talk about that the conversation becomes only one way. And so I encourage everybody in the audience to, tell us. So what do you want to do? Where are you stuck? What are the questions you have? This is the kind of stuff you need to come out and give at these meetings so that we can respond and have a conversation as opposed to just, you ask us a question and, we hit you with a mountain of informations and then we kill the conversation. We needed to have a conversation, not a one way. So please, participate. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, thank you, Marino. Yep, this is exactly what this particular time is for.
If I might take that invitation boldly here, I have many questions about how to jump in and get started. Like I said, I'm a complete beginner. I started reading about ham radio online because I was interested in ham radio internet of all things, and I'm really just interested in the technical side of how this all works. Like I just love the idea of using this as a way to study radio frequencies, maybe build up to making a radio telescope of some kind, and so I'm sort of really trying to get into the hardware side of it and understand how this works. Like I wrote down a whole bunch of questions about like these frequency gaps, and like I know there's a reason for that, but I need to like dig into the science of like why this exact number in the frequency gap and like why this exact number in the gap in the tone, and is there like a fuzziness to the signal? Trying to figure out things like that.
So Sam, tell us a little bit a bit more about your background, where you come from, and because that helps us tailor our answers to you, our answer to you.
Well, when I was in college, I was studying physics, but for personal life reasons, I had to drop out. And right now I'm an Uber driver. So I'm sort of getting back into things as a hobbyist. Like I actually also run a mathematics group on Meetup that's been going for about a year now. And I saw this ham radio meetup pop up in my suggestions. And this is something I've been thinking about for several different reasons. Like I just said, I'm really interested in the science of it. And on the other hand, with everything that's happened this year, I kept thinking, it would be really nice to have a reliable way to keep in contact with people who are dispersed. So there are the practical matters to consider.
Yes, if you are a maker, you like to build things. Definitely, this is a hobby with a lot of avenues for that interest. And sure, you needed to know a little bit of electronics, but you can get into that gradually. You can buy, as Max has said before, radios in a kit form, electronic kits that you can build with the solder and all of that, and you can start experiment. Or if you're more into the software side of things, you can buy products that are already made, and then you write some software and you start programming the radios and experiment that way. There is a big range of things with a continuum, and depending on what is your interest, you can get in one way or another. So but there is a lot to take if you want. And astronomy, yes, there are some people that focus exclusively on that one, and we can point you to we are not an expert on that, but we are aware of local people here that focus on that, so we can just point you the right way.
Well, thank you so much for the information. Like this whole meeting has been just eye-opening, and I learned several things that I never even thought I would ask the questions to. I just, you don't know what you don't know. So I really appreciate you guys holding this and being here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Kirk.
I was going to say, you were talking about frequencies and why we keep them apart a certain amount, and that in general, over the huge radio frequencies from microwave to radio waves that we call like 160 meter, which is how long the wave is. One cycle of the wave takes up 160 meters roughly of airspace as it travels. They all have different propagation characteristics. In other words, how well they travel. When we're talking long distance, do they bounce off the different layers of the atmosphere and come down 10 miles away or several thousand miles away? Radios are all built to different tolerances. Things like the Baofeng, very inexpensive, very functional, maybe not the best tolerances. So you plug in a frequency like Max has up here at 147.54, it might be also clear up to a 140, 48 or 149 as it splatters stuff around, because it can be a low tolerance or a broad, low quality, not very regulated build of the radio. So we've kind of built in, if I understand everything correctly, it's just been kind of standards that, you leave certain gaps in the frequencies, and those gaps change with the band or the frequencies you're using. And it's just to keep from interfering with each other as you're talking between people and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think wrong or need adjustment, please correct me.
No, I think that's a very good point, Kirk. And I'd also like to point out that when you get your ham radio license, ham or amateur radio is essentially radio that is kind of the opposite of commercial. So, you turn on the radio and you hear music. That's, they're doing that to make money, whereas ham radio or amateur radio is the enjoyment of radio without making money. And it's a hobby. It's an experimenter's hobby. One of the great things about ham radio is that we're pretty much one of the only groups of people that get to use the really low frequencies all the way up to the really high frequencies. We have, especially here in the U.S., a very broad set of frequencies that we're allowed to use, anywhere from 147 megahertz, which is fairly high, all the way down to the FCC just kind of allowed us about a year and a half ago to use some very low frequencies that we as ham radio operators haven't been able to use in decades. And there's a lot of experimentation in ham radio. You can certainly, as a ham radio operator, just go to the ham store, and we're lucky enough here in Portland to have a ham store called Ham Radio Outlet, where you can go kind of browse around and buy things. And there are some people that really just enjoy buying equipment and just not bothering learning about how the equipment works. But then there's the other side where it's like home brewing or building your own equipment that isn't very enjoyable to other people.
One quick comment on what we refer to as the candy store sometimes, which is Ham Radio Outlet. It's out in Tigard. They have closed their doors to in-person shopping again. So right now you can't go out and wander through the aisles and talk to the salespeople there. You basically have to know what you want or call them and see what you want. And then they'll come out to your car and do the transaction and stuff that way. But I went out last weekend and discovered that. So just for right now, the COVID thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirk, for that information.
Well,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Samantha.
Oh, thank you. Just one question I have though. It sounds like it's not a good idea to just start building something and testing it. Like I have to get a license and learn the radio etiquette and all that kind of stuff before, because if I build something, I'm going to have to test it. I can't just start using it right away.
Yeah, you can build it to listen. In the U.S. here, as U.S. citizens, we're allowed to listen to almost any frequency, with the exception of cellular frequencies. However, I think part of the fun part comes when you can actually transmit. And in order to transmit on ham bands, you would need your ham radio license. It's actually super easy to get your ham radio license. It's a 35-question test, multiple choice. The answers and the questions are already published. So I think Nick was on here earlier. He kind of just mentioned that one way that people get their ham radio license is just to simply read all the questions and answers a couple times, and just essentially memorize the test questions and answers. But you're going to find that it's more enjoyable when you have your ham radio license.
So Samantha, this may be leading you in the wrong direction, but when I first got into ham radio, it was common to have a separate box for receiver and transmitter. And Heathkit was real popular at the time with a variety of choices. All other things being equal, I would have built a receiver first from a kit and then built a transmitter after I got my license. I did the equivalent by using my older brother's receiver and then building a transmitter. And that path could still be out there, but I haven't researched it because almost everything you buy these days has got both in one, and it's of course called a transceiver. But there may still be separate transmitters. If you use the two on the same antenna, you need a relay to make sure they're not both using the antenna at once. And that's still quite feasible, but less common because everybody tends to buy transceivers.
Cool, thank you.
And if I could just chime in here real quick, I'm a relatively new ham myself, Samantha. I've only been licensed a couple of years. And I originally got into it because I had this kind of vague idea, much, I think, like what you were saying about emergency communications or that kind of thing. And what I found was that through the course of studying for my license and reading more I found this hobby that was like a hobby of a million hobbies. There's so many different things that you can do. I've recently been getting obsessive about antenna design and antenna theory and the physics behind that. For example, my background's I work in IT. I'm a security engineer. I've been in a technical field for a long time. It's really a great place to geek out on all sorts of really cool stuff. And there's a lot of material and a lot of opportunities to kind of follow your nose and just see what's interesting. So I think you're going to have a really good time, and radio astronomy and that kind of thing, shortwave listening, all sorts of different aspects to this are just tons of fun.
In this general, I have a question. Some of you probably saw the plans in QST a year or so ago for a pine board transmitter. That ring any bells? Now, when I was in 5th or 6th grade, I built essentially a pine board receiver. And I'm wondering, do any of you know of plans to build like a super het receiver that would essentially be along the same lines as that pine board transmitter? I've been trying to find something like that to build just for fun.
I think Dan was working on the pine board receiver. I'm not sure if it was a transmitter or receiver, but he was pretty nostalgic about
I
it.
did ask Dan about it, and
Yes, your friend Dan.
trying to find those plans, but that's why I'm just bringing it up in case any of you know about it.
Yeah, I think we could potentially, he's not on anymore, but ask Dan more about that. And
I did ask him about it. And he was talking about the transmitter, not the receiver. Yeah, he thought
okay.
If we could come up with those plans, that would be a great project.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
and go ahead, Marino.
It's interesting because another example of word overloading these days, sometimes when you read about Pine, you're thinking about a microprocessor called Pine. But in this case, we're really talking about a piece of pine wood.
Wood, yes.
And the breadboarding concept.
Yes.
So Jay, perhaps you can explain to some other people what was breadboarding.
Well,
was
the breadboarding allows you to lay out your components and have connectors that are not necessarily soldered, so you can connect and unconnect them easily. And believe it or not, I built a breadboard, so to speak, but I was using springs. So I could stick the component leads into the springs to connect them and build the circuits, and then take them out and rebuild some other kind of circuit using the same background. So it was a lot of fun.
Breadboard.
That particular receiver, you're exactly right.
We call it a breadboard.
Plywood and a front panel, and it had a single spoon in it.
Yeah, we still use those for kits.
Yes, and my friend Dan explained to me, English for me is a second language, and I use the word breadboarding without thinking too much about it. But he told me when they started, they were literally using the same piece of wood where they were making the bread, a flat slab, and that's the reason why it's called breadboarding.
Yeah, I actually used to make my own circuit boards, etch them out, that kind of thing.
And Stevie, did you have a question from earlier?
Oh, well, I wanted to add, and it was back a couple of, and I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. I wanted to add to one specific thing. I mean, she was talking about maybe building. It feels like, in a way, because I'm a mechanical engineering student side of it. So I feel that need to have my hands on tools and the parts in order to understand how a radio works. And that's the direction I came at it as well, as far as, I wanted to build a radio to be better at radio, and so that I could take the test. In order to build the radio to play with the radio, so I went to YouTube. And so there's this group I found called the YouTubers Bunch, and they do kit builds a lot. And there's another one coming up this Monday. I think they're building a dummy load, because the parts list is like an empty paint can and some baby mineral oils and stuff like that. So I don't know what a dummy load does, but I'm gonna build along and then I'll know what it does. And so maybe coming from that side of things, like you're probably gonna find the digital side like I did, and then want to know how computers work, and then you'll find Raspberry Pi, which it plays with breadboards. And so they're like little single board computers. But back to the analog side of things, there are kits like that are teeny tiny kits for, like, what do you guys call them? The CW? I don't know anything about anyways, I'm going to stop there because that's the limit of my knowledge. I'll listen.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, anybody that wants to build or experiment, ham radio definitely offers that opportunity. From a very simple, you could, like, the easiest way to get started would be just to build a simple AM receiver that doesn't even require a battery. Sometimes they use a razor blade. Sometimes they use a piece of quartz. But usually there are tons of plans online. But for just, putting a couple hours and a little bit of wire and maybe a safety pin, you can actually receive strong AM broadcast stations, just not even using a power source, because the AM signal in itself has enough energy to allow you to listen to the station. From there, it can get, as complex as you want it to be, from building kits to designing your own.
Yeah, they used to call those, crystal radios.
Yeah.
Comment from Bill?
Yeah, hey, Bill.
And that's for Samantha. Samantha, there are so many different aspects of radio that are really cool, but one thing that I would kind of suggest, and people help me, is that Gordon Long's book. There's a study book for getting your first license, and I think you end up paying $20-some for it. But it has all the questions, all the answers, and then just enough theory along with the subjects just to kind of say whet your interest and give you a little idea of a whole bunch of different things about radio that you can actually get that book, memorize, and when I say memorize, the answers to the questions, get your license, and then you've got a wide open door to being able to pursue all kinds of cool stuff about radio. But I would suggest you, for one thing, just do that very easy, get that first technician license. And I would even recommend that one book as a good starter book.
Is that the book that Bruce is holding up right now?
You can take practice tests online very easily.
Have you guys heard of him? That's great. There is another outfit called hamstudy.org, which is a website, hamstudy.org. And it's a website and also apps for iPhone and Android. And I'm going to put it in the chat room. Boom.
And Marino, if you could find that book too, maybe you can put it in the chat room.
Yes, I'll find the link.
Yeah, so essentially there's definitely free and low cost books or other materials to get you started. I would definitely recommend anybody that's interested in ham radio, at least just kind of take a look at the study materials. And if you can get your license, on average, it takes a person with no knowledge of electronics or radio theory approximately 10 hours of study to be proficient enough to go in and pass the test. Some people are a lot quicker. Some people take a little bit longer. It really kind of just depends on how much effort you put into it too, because studying for your ham radio license over 4 years is going to take a lot longer than doing it in 2 months or 4 months. Thanks, Marino.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody else with questions that you want to get answered, or at least attempt to get answered? Hey, Ryan.
Max, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So my background in radio has been very limited. I spent some time on the ski patrol on Mount Hood, and we were using the repeaters, didn't even know what they were. One of the guys had a different radio than the rest, and so I was asking him, and he was a ham. And I was just amazed that he made a phone call from his radio.
Yep.
Wife. And I said, I went, wow, someday I want to be able to do that. But as life took me through, my hunting group first had just bubble pack radios. And then we progressed to the Garmin radios so that we could have some GPS location. And the the area that I'm wanting to focus on is that we bump into limitations with those, just like the bubble packs on range and terrain and all that. But we've recognized the technology is somewhat stagnant, and we've always believed that cell phone technology would somehow move forward to the point to where we could integrate radios and smartphones. And I stumbled into APRS, and there's some software out there that has more of a military application, but ATAC, that helps teams kind of work together. And when we're out in the woods, we do kind of operate that way, just so for a safety reason, so we know where everybody is. And two, if you miss your check-in, that we at least have an approximate location. So I don't know if anybody has any experience with things that may be evolving past the Garmin Rhino technology.
Yeah, so Garmin Rhino, for those of you who don't know, are radios that are designed for people who like to stay in touch both through radio communication, so talking to each other, but it also has some extra features. For example, you can send your exact location to somebody else, a lot, very similar to a cell phone, except you don't even need you don't need to be in range of a cell tower in order to do this. I have a friend who actually uses these for hunting, and he says, they work pretty well. I kind of think his hunting area is pretty small. It's no more than a couple miles in each direction. Ryan, I think that you mentioned that there are some limitations that you found with these. Ham radio doesn't really have like an exact replacement to it, but there are some things like APRS, automatic position reporting system, that ham radio does have, that is somewhat similar in that you can actually have your ham radio not only communicate to other people through audio, through your voice, but also report your exact position using a GPS receiver, mapping software. You could even carry a radio with GPS out on the trail, and somebody, anybody anywhere in the world could actually watch you, hike or travel along by just logging into a website and putting your call sign in. So that's kind of an example of something that's sort of like the Rhino radios, but on the ham radio side. It also has some limitations. It's a little bit more technical and not quite as user friendly. So I would say it's not quite like an iPhone where you just pick it up and you know exactly what to do, but it does have some advantages in that the range might be a lot better than the Rhino radios. Plus, it has the ability to connect to the internet, where you can actually broadcast messages and other information over a lot longer distances and to more people.
Can I ask one question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Stevie.
You were talking about walking and having somebody follow you along on like a GPS track, and you just reminded me of Soda and Poda. And this is my first time talking to any Portland specific ham groups, and I just got so excited. I don't know if we have time for that in this meeting or if we can set it for an agenda point for later, but can you maybe just cover like, because of the human malware virus, if are we doing, how do I do it, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so this Soda and Poda are going to be something that is covered in a future topic. So I have that already written down for something. So we probably won't be able to cover a lot here, but
okay, that's fair.
Very, very high level, like Soda summits on the air and Poda parks on the air is a part, or one of those sub hobbies of ham radio that really encourages people to get out of their ham shack or get out of their apartment or house and go up into either a park or on the top of a mountain, and to set up a ham radio station there. There are different challenges to doing that. Number one, you have to pack in your radio and your antenna, and you have to set it up, and you have to have power. but there's a lot of enjoyment that comes from that. For example, because you're, Summit's on the air, you're usually high up on top of a mountain somewhere, so your reception might be a lot better than in your apartment, which happens to be made of concrete and steel. So that's kind of like just a very, very brief overview of SOTA and POTA, but that'll be one of our future topics. Cool. We're running out a little bit short on time, but I just want to make sure anybody else have any questions, burning questions that they want to have answers to.
And we're going to leave also our email addresses in the chat room if in case you come up with some ideas during the week that you want to get some input or something. Yeah.
And you guys are all subscribed to the Portland Amateur Radio Club meeting. So you will see invites for the monthly meetings that we have. This is the second Tuesday of the month at 7 o'clock. I'm sorry, second Monday of the month at 7 o'clock. And it's a similar format, a Zoom. We'll have speakers' presentations that usually last about an hour with questions and answers afterwards. And it's a little bit different because it's designed more for people that already have their license, but everybody is welcome to come. I encourage everybody to come, even if 90% of it goes over your head. It's a great exposure to ham radio, because you may hear SOTA and POTA now and have no idea what I'm talking about, but if you hear it 4 or 5 more times and you have other people describe it to you, it may make sense at some point. Cool. Any other questions? Comments? Do you guys like this format where we kind of do a topic in the beginning? Okay.
Yes, Max, thank you. This has really been fabulous. I've learned a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah, so we're here to help you. Marino, I know he receives a lot of emails, and he is wonderful in getting back to people right away with a lot of different resources.
I'm a link slinger.
Yes.
I sling links like
Yes.
that.
Which is awesome.
Well, let's talk about Bruce is very key here, because a lot of questions are related to emergency communication, and Bruce is a fantastic resource. He coordinates that program. And so you get the right people in the room here to help you out no matter what, or at least to point you out to other people and other places. So hopefully,
I pasted my email in the chat a while back. If you didn't see it, give a shout.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and Bruce is the one, emergency communications, right, Bruce?
Correct.
Which is, one of the reasons why a lot of people get into ham radio. Bruce is your guy.
I'm not the only one, but I'm one of those that's on this call, so happy to help.
Awesome.
Hopefully with time also we'll experiment with other things, like perhaps having 2 cameras so we can talk and show our faces, but also show something else, so we can make it a show and tell. We'll get better at this. The important thing is you guys keep asking questions, right? Cool.